Good morning, everyone, and hello to our global Sangha. There's kind of always been troubles in the world, and at different points in time, people consider that this particular point is in particular crisis, and it does feel like that, and maybe it's true. And right now, there is a feeling in many places around the world that we are in particular crisis with the recent war that has started between Israel and the United States bombing Iran. And there's also the backdrop of the amount of economic uncertainty there has been globally, coming from policies from the United States primarily. So a question that a lot of people are asking in the practice world, in the Zen world, in the spiritual world, is what is our responsibility in situations like this when there is great injustice, when there is violence and suffering, particular suffering. There's always suffering. And there's debates that people have, amongst different religious communities about should we be doing something specific, like being involved in activism or social justice work, or should we be creating and maintaining safe spaces that are quiet and still. And I like to think that really we can do something, that the question isn't so much about whether to get actively involved in worldly affairs, you could call it, the way it's translated in the Pali Canon, do we get involved actively in worldly affairs or do we not? I think what really is maybe the truer question is, can we cultivate a kind of internal stability so that then we can decide whether it sort of suits our personality, suits our circumstance, for us to be involved in, maybe we can call it political action or social justice. I think that that's a better question to ask. Can we cultivate and share and create for others a way to have a stability, a deeply compassionate but equanimous stability, while crisis is going on around us? Because there's something incredibly valuable in having a kind of steady anchor point while crisis is happening. People really appreciate it when they can see it in someone. And a person can be very engaged in advocating or protesting, or I kind of think the word protecting is much better than protesting, because usually when people are out there doing some kind of activism, they're actually trying to protect something. And what they almost always, I would say always, trying to protect is some people or some part of nature or some culture that is less powerful than the forces that are assaulting it. So if we're going to engage in that sort of work, I think what's critical is not whether we do it or don't do it, but can we do it while maintaining a kind of internal stability with a widely compassionate frame of mind, so we have no enemies. So even if we're trying to protect the less powerful from the more powerful, we have no hatred for the more powerful. Having hatred for the powerful creates another set of problems. So I think that maybe is really the question. And then I think it's really just up to where we're each at in our lives, how we want to engage out there in the three-dimensional world. In the past, I have done a lot of activism, but in these recent years, I seem to just want to be doing this. I just want to be providing a space. Our morning and evening zazen, here at the temple, doing individual study, looking after the piece of land that I have and inviting people to spend time on the land, really communing with nature and living very simply without a lot of the trappings of modern society. That's where my inspiration is. At other points in time, my inspiration was to be out there and holding placards and things and getting arrested at times. And so I don't think there's a real right or wrong about any of this. It's just where are we drawn at this point in our life. There's a lot of discussion about this in America, as you can imagine, in the Buddhist community. And I know some people who are maintaining a kind of deep stability while they're also caring for undocumented immigrants in the United States. They're organising groceries to be taken to their homes so that they don't have to risk going out onto the street. At times, in recent times, it's been that frightening for people. They don't feel safe just to go to the grocery store or for children to go to school. And so quite a few different priests that I know have helped organise ways of taking food to those families. And they've done it in a way that feels very steady. They often actually wear their robes, or at least wear their rakusu, to remind themselves that they are practitioners. And then there's been other people who have felt quite differently, that they've felt for them, they just want to be in a sort of monastic setting so that the world knows that with all of the injustice and the violence and so on that is happening, that the people know there are some who are just calmly sitting in meditation, carefully eating their food, mindfully sipping their tea, mindfully sweeping, putting on their robes, folding up their robes. I think it's very wonderful to know that there's people doing that. I can remember even as a girl thinking about the nuns that I would hear about, the Catholic nuns who would just be living very cloistered lives. And there was something about that was very inspiring to me, even though I was busy wearing high heel shoes and things, just knowing that they were just leading incredibly simple lives, baking bread, praying, walking quietly. It was nourishing for me to know that they existed. And I think for many people, they find it nourishing just knowing that there are people who are calm and steady in the midst of all of the difficulties. So whatever we decide to do, we can really cultivate what Zen can offer us, is this deep cultivation of steadiness. And there's a koan I'd like to read. It's case 21 from the Book of Serenity. Yunyan sweeps the ground. So there's these two great Zen masters, Yunyan and Dao Wu, and they just have this dialogue with each other, this kind of playful Dharma exchange. So as Yunyan was sweeping the ground, Dao Wu said, "Too busy." Yunyan said, "You should know there is one who isn't busy." Dao Wu said, "If so, then there's a second moon." And Yunyan held up his broom and said, "Which moon is this?" So I imagine it's like in a courtyard. I don't know what it is, but I imagine that it's in a courtyard and Yunyan is sweeping. Sweeping is part of what we do as in Zen, like when we do samu, work practice on retreat. We sweep. Sometimes we're sweeping outside and there's no particular leaves or anything anyway, but we just sweep. A lot of what work in the Zen tradition isn't so much about achieving a goal, although sometimes, of course, monks needed to grow rice to eat, so, they definitely had a goal. But often we just do it so that we're wholeheartedly doing it. And sweeping is like that. Also on retreat, we sweep the dining hall every day. There's the floor's always clean in the dining hall, but we sweep it anyway. And so it's just a mindful sweeping. I don't think it's an accident, because sweeping's a little bit like breathing. There's one movement one direction, and then one movement back the other direction. And it's just a back and forth, like breathing. So Yunyan is sweeping. I think of him in a courtyard, sweeping whatever little leaves, twigs may have fallen since the last time that he was sweeping. And Dao Wu comes up and just kind of playfully says, "Too busy, like, you're being so busy sweeping." And really without missing a beat, but also still calmly, Yunyan says, "You should know there's one who isn't busy." And that's exactly what we're that we are cultivating through our Zazen practice, to have a steadiness even while we're doing things, to have stillness inside our activity. It makes the activity so much more effective. If we think, for example, if you see people having a dispute and then someone can be very steady in that dispute, they can help calm a dispute between people through their steady attention. A good parent can do that. Rather than, if there's two siblings fighting, rather than coming in and shouting at both of them and creating even more upheaval, a good parent can just calmly but steadily, "Okay, you two, you need to go, you go to your room and you go out and play in the backyard, and I don't want to hear another word." They can have a steadiness, and then the children are a little more likely to calm down. So Yunyan says, "You should know there is one who isn't busy." So even though he's sweeping, even if you might be out there chaining yourself to a fence, you cannot be busy while you do that. You can be holding up a banner and not be busy while you're doing that. You can even be getting arrested. You can even be protecting people in a violent situation. You can do that and not be busy, and it will be more effective and more powerful. So you should know there is one who isn't busy, says Yunyan. And then Dao Wu says, again, just it's kind of like they're playing, like a Dharma play. Oh, so you're saying there's two moons, like a busy person and a not busy person. So it's a little provocation. What's he going to do with this? And then Yunyan again just holds up his broom and says, how many moons is this? There's only one broom right here in his hand. So this is a way of saying we can have form and emptiness, activity and stillness together, which is exactly what our mudra is. The right hand is activity, the left hand is stillness, and we have them together. Activity and stillness together. Some of you may have heard about the peace walk that happened in the United States recently. I wrote down the distances. So it was a group of Theravadan monks, and they walked 2,300 miles. Is that something like 4,000 kilometres, something like that, from Texas to Washington, D.C. And the lead monk, Bhikkhu Panakara, and their dog Aloka, which a lot of people were very enamoured with the dog. They walked calmly for 108 days through very cold weather, windy weather, all sorts of weather. And it was kind of extraordinary. I don't know, I haven't looked into the background enough to know whether it was timed for any particular reason, but it did coincide with a lot of the arrests and assaults that were happening in Minnesota, with the immigration officers taking undocumented people and all sorts of people, basically people of colour really, in a very unjust way. It kind of coincided, and I don't know the background about the timing, but it was extraordinary to see the footage of these monks calmly walking, caring about everyone, like no ill thought in their minds. You could see that. And the police and sheriffs who were escorting them, you could see in them, it was so moving sometimes to see the police do little bows to the monks, because the power of their steadiness. And thousands over the weeks, thousands and thousands of ordinary Americans, not Buddhists or anything, would line the streets as they were walking, and you were seeing all of these people from all different walks of life, and so many of them just couldn't seem to help themselves but do that. It's a universal symbol of some kind of respect to go like that. I have no weapons in my hand, and I'm bowing my head to you. I'm not scared of you. It was amazing to watch. So for me, that was a beautiful kind of middle path where they were taking action but doing it with such a steadiness, so much care for everyone. But we don't have to do that. We can do it all different ways. There's lots of ways of working out how to be of service in this world. But I do think the power of that walk was the internal stability of the monks. You know, people could see it. The snow would just be coming down, and there'd be wind blowing. It would be some incredibly cold temperature, and they'd still walk very steadily. They'd keep a steady pace. And I think people they see that, and they're so inspired to see that kind of quiet courage, like an incredible quiet courage, to be able to keep on moving. At other times, I'm sure it was very hot. They still wore their robes. Sometimes they would be barefoot, and they were barefoot for a lot of the time, but at a certain point it got so cold that they had to wear footwear of some sort. I'm thinking too of one of the great teachers who's passed away now, Thich Nhat Hanh, and how he advocated for stopping the war in Vietnam, but he did it with an incredible calmness. You know, he travelled all over the place, advocating for the war to end. And there's the wonderful story, I haven't read it for a long time, so I've forgotten some of the details, but the wonderful story of him being in the States at a conference where he spoke. And this is a man who had witnessed many of his own monks and nuns dying. He'd witnessed them and participated in being under fire from guns from all sides, carrying the wounded, carrying the dead. You know, he'd just done extraordinary things, not just for his own people, but for anyone. He cared about American soldiers, he cared about the North Vietnamese, he cared about the South Vietnamese, he cared about everybody. He was completely unaligned. He was just against the war itself. He was very clear about that. And so he was speaking at this big gathering, and an American man got up and spoke very rudely to him and said, if you cared so much about your own people, what are you doing in America? Why don't you just go home? And at the time, people said it was just such a jarring, shocking thing to hear this kind of aggression and disrespect towards this incredibly wonderful, he was a younger monk then, I don't know, he was probably in his 40s or something at that stage. And he described how difficult it was for him to steady his breathing in that moment. He didn't want to sort of collapse under the sort of injustice of the verbal assault. He didn't want to crumble, but he didn't want to be combative either. And he just took some time to steady his heart rate and steady his breathing. And then he responded. I can't remember what it was he responded, but whatever it was, people were very moved by his response. And I think I recall hearing somewhere, although maybe I'm just imagining it, that the person who spoke to him so disrespectfully himself was someone who was probably struggling. Maybe his son was in Vietnam fighting, who knows. There may be some background to that. But there's always a background. There's always a story for why someone is the way they are. So no need to hold him up as the bad guy. He was just another person with his own troubles. So even though Thich Nhat Hanh was quite active, he also was very still. And I think that's really the thing I'm wanting to convey, that it's not about whether you are out there on the streets or not. It's can you do whatever you do with a deep, compassionate equanimity that you carry with you, and then whatever you do will be beneficial. And there's a last verse. This is a verse from the Mumongkan, the Gateless Barrier, and it's a verse by Wu Men, and it goes like this. Spring comes with flowers, autumn with the moon, summer with breeze, winter with snow. When idle concerns don't hang in your mind, that is your best season. So whether things are going well, whether they're going badly, if you can have a certain kind of ability to look up and see the sky, to look out and see the trees, to hear the sound of people singing happy birthday, singing the Australian anthem while we're doing zazen, then that's your best season. So, would anyone like to comment or ask a question? Moeko.
Very interesting. You talked about the difference between protest and protect, and you suggested the shifting from protest to protect. I found it very, very interesting. So could you explain a bit more but what will happen or what might happen if we shift our focus from protest to protect?
Can you hear all right online? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, well, it's not my idea. I came across that somewhere. I like it because protest, the emphasis is on what you're protesting against, and protect is what you're doing it for. So if I'm wanting to stop koalas' habitat from being destroyed, I think it's preferable for people to know that that's what I'm doing. I don't want their very limited habitat to be destroyed, rather than I don't want you to cut down the trees. It's just the different emphasis. So I think sometimes the terms that we use aren't actually accidental. You know, we're all very affected by the way in which terms are created and propagated within society. And we're very influenced by how the media frames things. And we often frame things just accidentally, so to speak, just because it just tumbles along. And the fact that people who are trying to protect the less powerful from the more powerful, that's framed as protesting, actually I think we've kind of been conned to use that language. It's better language to say we're trying to protect something. The emphasis is on what it is we're protecting. We want to protect this. In a way, it shows our nobility. We're trying to protect this. We're protecting these people from being discriminated against. Protecting them is different to, we don't want you to do that thing. You know? It's much more easy if you're saying, we don't want you to do this thing, to be framed as just troublemakers. Because you're not identifying the reason that you're doing it. You know, a lot of these labels that get used, I think we should look very carefully at the labels that get used. Try to unpack them and really, unpack them and see what's going on. So I think, protectors, it's more heartfelt. Just, yeah. Jisan.
Yeah, thank you, Mushin. That was a really good and interesting talk, and I appreciate the distinction between protest and protect. And I think it's also the difference between political and social action, that or social action or compassionate action. To act out of compassion is it's one of the Zen peacemakers' tenets, or the three tenets that we all adhere to: compassionate action. So to not hate the other side, but that what you're doing is it's for what's valued, the social value of whether it be for the environment, other creatures, or for human beings. So I appreciate that distinction.
Margaret.
I'm thinking a lot of the conflict between Palestinian supporters and Israeli people who are also suffering would have been better handled if people had had that concept in their mind. We're protecting the quality of your life, or we're protecting your life, and that applies to Israelis as well as Palestinians. even though there's a horrendous imbalance, it might have, maybe if people thought that way, we wouldn't have this sort of, okay, you're on Palestine's side, you must be anti-Semitic, which creates another level of hostility and energy, evil energy, undesirable energy. It's a very useful concept, but it also makes it hard for protesters, and I'm one of them, to be specific about what the other side is doing to damage, in my case, the environment. If you're just talking about protecting it, it's harder to say stop opening coal mines. I suppose you need more words, if you get what I'm saying. And when you're protesting, you want to have a minimum of words to get your message across. But it would help, I think, protesters if they thought of the two of them, protect and protest. Yeah. And Rising Tide, a big movement in Australia against the coal industry, have Rising Tide on the front of their t-shirts, on the back. It's environment protectors.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm sure they had that concept in mind, not just protesting, but protecting. Mm.
And I think we get lots of opportunities to be thoughtful about what we say and what we, how we respond when people talk to us. I remember once when I first came back to Australia, I was working with Extinction Rebellion a little bit. We did a protest somewhere about something, and someone shouted, get a job or something like that at us. And the person I was with just sort of gave them the finger. And I said to them, but I just said, like, playfully, but also definitely, we're doing this for their children too. We're doing this for their children. We want the environment to be more stable for their kids. And that person sort of like, they went, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so we're doing it for everyone. We're always doing everything for everyone. And I think if we just keep that in mind and don't ever get seduced into good guy, bad guy polarities. There's more powerful and less powerful, absolutely, but there's no actual good guys, bad guys. It's Buddha's profound teaching of Buddha nature. There are no bad people. There's just more powerful people and less powerful people, and sometimes, often, more powerful people misuse that power. And they shouldn't have so much power. There shouldn't be such big discrepancies. But we just do what we do within the systems that we're in. And I think people notice that kind of, to not have hate, people respect that. In the end, I think almost everybody, maybe a small number of people who are particularly deluded in their thinking, but the majority of people, a little part of them goes, wow, when someone doesn't take that bait and becomes hateful like that person, get a job. Which is such a funny thing to say. Like, I do have a job. But even if I didn't, it wouldn't matter.
I just pointed my hair. And I have nothing to say.
That's just a reflex. Maybe if you think about why someone would say that, maybe it's like they're finding it quite hard in the job that they have. They're working hard and not actually earning that much, and they can't pay their rent or they can't meet their mortgage easily. So seeing you out there looking like you've got free time to be caring about koalas or something, maybe that hurts a little bit. I mean, this is our job, is to think like this, to keep thinking empathically, to have that creative capacity, to keep thinking empathically all the time. It's intelligent work to do that. It's demanding, but that's what our practice is. We don't want to ever be flipping people off or swearing back at them. We don't want to ever be doing that. And if we do, go, oops, take a breath and start again. All right. So thank you, everyone. We'll finish with our last chant. It's our vow to save all beings. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. And then we'll do 3 prostrations. We're just going to make a circle and say the informal goodbye. Do you mind picking up the laptop, Michael? Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us. Good to see you, Russ. Good to see you, Martha.
Thank you, beautiful ones.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye for now.